Have you ever been told you could never do the one thing that defines your entire existence? New York City, March 1956. Dr. William Harrison, one of the city's most respected throat specialists, had just delivered the most devastating news possible to one of America's greatest singers. The damage to Billie Holiday's vocal cords was irreversible, he said. Her singing career was over. But what happened 6 months later would prove that sometimes the human spirit is more powerful than medical science, and that the deepest wounds can create the most beautiful music. If you love discovering the untold stories behind music history's most incredible moments, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell because we uncover the hidden gems that shape the legends we know today. Mount Sinai Hospital, New York City, March 12, 1956. 2:30 p.m. Billie Holiday sat in Dr. William Harrison's office, waiting for the results of extensive tests on her throat and vocal cords. She'd been experiencing problems for months: hoarseness, pain while singing, a gradual loss of her upper range. Dr. Harrison was 52 years old, one of New York's leading otolaryngologists, known for treating opera singers, Broadway performers, and other professional vocalists. He'd examined hundreds of damaged voices over his 20-year career, and he prided himself on being both honest and compassionate with his patients. But the news he was about to deliver to Billie Holiday was unlike anything he'd faced before. "Miss Holiday," Dr. Harrison said gently, "I've reviewed your test results and I need to discuss them with you." Billie nodded, her hands folded in her lap. She'd been preparing herself for bad news, but she hoped it would be temporary. Maybe a few weeks of rest, some medication, vocal exercises. "The damage to your vocal cords is extensive," Dr. Harrison continued. "Years of strain combined with other factors have caused significant scarring and inflammation." "Other factors?" Dr. Harrison chose his words carefully. "Smoking, alcohol use, and certain substances can all contribute to vocal cord damage." Billie understood what he meant. Her struggles with addiction, her heavy smoking, the stress of performing in smoke-filled clubs for decades, it had all taken its toll. "What does that mean for my singing?" Dr. Harrison took a deep breath. "Miss Holiday, in my professional opinion, your singing career is over. The damage is irreversible. Any attempt to sing professionally will only cause further harm and potentially permanent damage to your throat." The words hit Billie like a physical blow. She sat in silence for a long moment, processing what she'd just heard. "You're saying I can never sing again?" "I'm saying you should never sing again. Not professionally. Not the way you have been. The risk is too great. What if I rest? What if I stop smoking, stop drinking?" "Miss Holiday, those things might prevent further damage, but they won't repair what's already been done. The scarring is permanent." Billie looked down at her hands. Singing wasn't just her career. It was her identity, her purpose, her way of processing and expressing everything she felt about life. "How long do I have? How long for what? How long before I lose my voice completely?" Dr. Harrison considered this. "If you continue singing professionally, perhaps 6 months. Maybe less. And if I stop now? You might retain some speaking voice. But singing? Miss Holiday, I strongly advise you to retire from performing." Billie left Dr. Harrison's office in a daze. She walked the streets of Manhattan for hours, trying to comprehend a future without music, without the stage, without the one thing that had defined her life since she was 14 years old. That night, she canceled a scheduled performance at the Blue Note. Then she canceled the next week's shows. Then the rest of the month. Word spread quickly through New York's music community. Billie Holiday was sick. Billie Holiday was taking a break. Billie Holiday might never perform again. For the first few weeks, friends and colleagues called regularly. Fellow musicians stopped by her apartment, offering support, encouragement, advice. But as time went on, the calls became less frequent. The music world moved on as it always did. Billie fell into a depression unlike anything she'd experienced before. Without music, without performing, she felt like she was disappearing. She'd based her entire identity on being a singer, and now that was gone. She stopped listening to music. She couldn't bear to hear other people sing when she couldn't. She stopped going to clubs, stopped socializing with musicians, stopped engaging with the world that had been her home for 25 years. The silence was devastating. For someone who had spent her life making sound, creating music, filling spaces with her voice. The absence of singing felt like a kind of death. Friends tried to encourage her to find other interests, other purposes. You could teach, some suggested. You could write about music. You could manage other singers. But none of these alternatives felt like living to Billie. They felt like ways of being near music without being able to participate in it, like watching life through a window instead of living it. 3 months into her silence, Billie received a visit from her friend Carmen McRae, a fellow jazz singer who had been deeply influenced by Billie's style. "Billie," Carmen said, "this isn't living. This is just existing." The doctor said a lot of things. But he's never been a singer. He doesn't understand what music means to you. "Carmen, my voice is damaged. If I sing, I could lose it completely. And if you don't sing, you've already lost it completely." Carmen's words stayed with Billie long after she left. She began to realize that by trying to preserve her voice, she had effectively silenced it anyway. The fear of losing her ability to sing had already taken away her singing. But it would be another 3 months before Billie found the courage to test her voice again. The opportunity came unexpectedly. Jimmy's Lounge, a small jazz club in Greenwich Village, was hosting a tribute night for Billie Holiday, celebrating her career, her influence on other singers, her contributions to jazz. Carmen McRae was scheduled to perform, along with several other singers who had been inspired by Billie's work. Carmen called Billie the day before the tribute. "You should come," she said. "People want to honor you. They want to celebrate what you've given to music. I don't know if I can handle listening to other people sing my songs." "Then don't listen. Sing them yourself." Billie was quiet for a long moment. "Carmen, I can't." The doctor said. "Billie, what if the doctor was wrong? What if your voice isn't gone? What if it's just different? And what if he was right? What if I get up there and nothing comes out? Then at least you'll know. At least you'll have tried." September 15, 1956, 9:30 p.m. Jimmy's Lounge was packed with musicians, music lovers, and people who had been following Billie's career for decades. The tribute had been beautiful. Carmen and others had performed Billie's songs with reverence and skill. Billie sat at a small table in the back, wearing dark glasses, hoping not to be recognized. She told no one she was coming. She just wanted to hear her music one more time, to remember what it felt like to be part of the world she'd lost. As the evening wound down, Carmen approached the microphone for her final song. "Before I finish tonight," Carmen said, "I want to say something about the woman we're honoring. Billie Holiday isn't just a great singer. She's a teacher, a truth teller, a voice for people who don't have voices." The audience applauded. But more than anything, she's shown us that music isn't about perfection. It's about honesty. It's about taking whatever you've been given, whether it's a beautiful voice or a broken one, and using it to tell the truth. Carmen looked directly at Billie's table. "Billie, I know you're here tonight, and I want to ask you something." Billie felt her heart start racing. "Will you come up here and sing one song with me? Not for us. For yourself." The entire club turned to look at Billie. There was no hiding now, no anonymity. She was exposed, vulnerable, terrified. But she was also tired of being afraid. Slowly, Billie stood up and began walking toward the stage. The audience watched in complete silence as one of the greatest singers of all time approached a microphone for the first time in 6 months. Carmen handed her the microphone. "What do you want to sing?" Billie thought for a moment. "God Bless the Child." The piano player began the opening chords. Billie closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened her mouth to sing, what came out was not the voice that had made her famous. It was deeper, raspier, more fragile. The smooth, supple voice of her younger years was gone, replaced by something that sounded weathered, wounded, but incredibly powerful. "Them that's got shall have, them that's not shall lose." The voice was different, but it was still unmistakably Billie Holiday. If anything, the damage had given her voice new depths, new colors, new ways of expressing pain and resilience. The audience was transfixed. This wasn't the technical perfection they remembered from her earlier years. This was something more raw, more honest, more heartbreaking. Yes, the strong seem to get more, while the weak ones fade. As Billie sang, she felt something she hadn't felt in 6 months. She felt alive. The fear was still there. Fear that her voice would give out. fear that she was damaging herself further. But stronger than the fear was the joy of making music again. When she finished the song, the silence lasted for nearly 30 seconds. Then the applause began and it didn't stop. The audience was on its feet, crying, cheering, celebrating not just the performance but the courage it represented. Billie looked out at the crowd, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered into the microphone. As she left the stage, a man in the audience stood up. "Miss Holiday," he called out, "could I speak with you for a moment?" Billie turned to look at him and felt her heart skip. It was Dr. William Harrison, the throat specialist who had ended her career 6 months earlier. "Dr. Harrison," Billie said as he approached, "I didn't expect to see you here." "Miss Holiday, I need to apologize to you." "For what?" "For being wrong. For telling you never to sing again. For not understanding that some things are more important than medical safety." Dr. Harrison looked shaken. "When I told you to stop singing, I was thinking like a doctor. I was focused on preserving your physical health. But I wasn't thinking about what singing means to you, what music means to your soul. Doctor, you were trying to help me. I was trying to prevent physical damage. But in doing so, I caused a different kind of damage. I silenced you when the world needs your voice. My voice is damaged. You were right about that." "Your voice is different," Dr. Harrison corrected. "But different doesn't mean worse. What I heard tonight was more powerful than technical perfection. It was truth, pain, resilience, hope, all wrapped up in sound." He paused, struggling with his words. "Miss Holiday, I've been a throat doctor for 20 years. I've treated hundreds of singers. But I've never heard anything like what you just did." "What do you mean?" "I mean you took a damaged instrument and made it more beautiful, not less. You found a way to make your limitations into strengths." Dr. Harrison reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. "Miss Holiday, if you're willing to take some precautions, to modify your performing schedule, to take care of your voice in new ways, I think you can keep singing." "What kind of precautions?" "Shorter sets. Lower keys. More breaks between performances. No more smoke-filled clubs if possible. An absolute honesty about when you need to rest." "And you think that would work?" "I think what you did tonight proves that your voice, even damaged, is too important to silence completely." Billie looked at the business card, then back at Dr. Harrison. "Doctor, why are you changing your mind?" "Because tonight you taught me something about medicine that I'd forgotten. Sometimes the cure is worse than the disease. Sometimes preserving life means accepting risk. And you're willing to take that risk?" "Miss Holiday, after hearing you sing tonight, I'm more afraid of a world without your voice than I am of any medical complications." 3 weeks later, Billie returned to regular performing. But it was different now. Her voice was different, her approach was different, her relationship with music was different. She could no longer hit the high notes that had characterized her early career. She couldn't perform as many songs in a single set. She had to rest more, warm up carefully, and end shows earlier than she used to. But what she gained in exchange was a new depth of expression. The damage to her voice had paradoxically made her a more powerful singer. Every note carried weight, every phrase had meaning, every performance felt precious because she knew how easily it could be lost. Critics and audiences noticed the change immediately. "Holiday's voice has aged," one reviewer wrote. "But like fine wine, it has gained complexity and emotional depth that her earlier performances, beautiful as they were, couldn't match." Other singers who had been told to retire because of vocal damage began seeking out Dr. Harrison for second opinions. He had learned from his experience with Billie that medical advice needed to consider the whole person, not just the damaged body part. "I used to think my job was to preserve voices," Dr. Harrison told colleagues. "Now I understand that my job is to help people use their voices in whatever way allows them to remain fully human." He developed new protocols for working with professional singers, approaches that balanced medical safety with artistic necessity. His work with damaged voices became a model for other specialists around the country. But perhaps most importantly, Billie's comeback inspired other artists to continue creating despite physical limitations. Musicians with arthritis, singers with damaged voices, dancers with injured joints, they all found encouragement in Billie's example. "She showed us that limitations don't have to mean limitations," said jazz pianist Bill Evans, who struggled with his own health issues. Sometimes what looks like damage is actually transformation. Billie continued performing for the rest of her life, which tragically ended just 3 years later in 1959. But those final 3 years were among her most powerful, most emotionally resonant performances. Her last album, recorded in 1958, was titled Lady in Satin. Critics noted the fragility of her voice, but also its incredible emotional power. The damaged voice had become a perfect instrument for expressing a lifetime of pain, struggle, and hard-won wisdom. Dr. Harrison attended her final performance in New York, just 2 months before her death. After the show, he wrote in his journal, "Tonight I heard the most beautiful broken voice in the world. Billie Holiday has taught me that healing doesn't always mean returning to what was. Sometimes it means accepting what is and finding beauty in the brokenness." Today, Dr. Harrison's approach to treating performing artists is taught in medical schools around the world. His collaboration with Billie Holiday changed how medical professionals think about quality of life, artistic expression, and the balance between physical safety and emotional well-being. But perhaps the most lasting impact of Billie's comeback was the message it sent to anyone who had been told they couldn't do what they loved anymore. Her return to the stage 6 months after being told she'd never sing again proved that sometimes the experts are wrong, and that the human spirit's need for expression can overcome seemingly insurmountable physical obstacles. Recordings from her post-comeback period are now considered among her greatest work. The voice that Dr. Harrison had declared irreversibly damaged became, in its final years, one of the most moving and powerful instruments in the history of recorded music. Students of vocal music study these late recordings not just for their emotional impact, but for what they teach about resilience, adaptation, and the ways that apparent limitations can become sources of strength. Billie Holiday's damaged voice became her greatest gift, wrote jazz historian Dan Morgenstern. She proved that perfection is less important than truth, and that sometimes you have to break something to discover what it's really capable of. The story of Billie Holiday's comeback remains one of the most inspiring examples of artistic resilience in music history. It reminds us that our greatest weaknesses can become our greatest strengths, and that the experts don't always understand the full measure of human potential. Most importantly, it teaches us that sometimes the most beautiful music comes not from undamaged instruments, but from voices that have learned to sing through their scars. The impact of Billie's comeback extended far beyond the music world. Physical therapists began incorporating her story into treatment programs for patients who had lost function they thought was essential to their identity. Speech therapists used her example to encourage patients with vocal damage to explore new ways of communicating. Billie Holiday proved that adaptation isn't the same as surrender, explained Dr. Sarah Chun, who developed rehabilitation programs for performing artists. She showed us that when one door closes, sometimes a better door opens, but you have to be brave enough to walk through it. The medical community also learned from Dr. Harrison's experience. Medical schools began teaching courses on the psychological and emotional aspects of treating artists, emphasizing the importance of understanding what performance means to a patient's sense of self. "We learned that you can't separate the artist from the art," said Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who worked with Dr. Harrison in developing new treatment protocols. "When you tell a singer never to sing again, you're not just treating a throat condition, you're potentially destroying someone's reason for living." This holistic approach to medical treatment influenced how doctors approached other professions where identity is closely tied to physical ability. Athletes facing career-ending injuries, dancers with chronic pain, writers with vision problems, all began receiving more comprehensive care that considered psychological and emotional factors alongside physical symptoms. The story of Billie's 6-month silence became a case study in medical ethics programs. Students learned to consider the full impact of their recommendations, understanding that sometimes the cure could be more devastating than the disease. Dr. Harrison himself became a frequent speaker at medical conferences, sharing what he'd learned from his mistake with Billie Holiday. "I thought I was saving her voice," he would tell audiences, "but I was actually silencing her soul." Sometimes the most compassionate medical advice is to help patients find ways to keep doing what they love, even if it involves risk. His revised approach to treating vocal damage became known as the Harrison Protocol, emphasizing collaboration between medical professionals and patients to find solutions that preserved both health and artistic expression. The protocol influenced treatment approaches worldwide. Conservatories and music schools began incorporating medical education into their curricula, teaching young performers how to recognize vocal damage early and work with medical professionals to maintain their careers. But perhaps the most profound impact was on other performers who were facing their own struggles with aging, injury, or illness. Billie's example showed them that career evolution didn't have to mean career ending. Jazz pianist Keith Jarrett, who later faced his own health challenges that affected his playing, often referenced Billie's comeback. She taught us that you don't have to be the same artist you were 20 years ago to be a great artist today. Sometimes limitation forces you to discover abilities you never knew you had. The recording industry also changed its approach to aging artists. Instead of discarding performers whose voices or abilities had changed, labels began to see artistic maturation as a potential asset, recognizing that experience and emotional depth could compensate for technical limitations. Billie's post-comeback recordings consistently outsold her earlier work, proving that audiences were drawn to authenticity and emotional truth rather than just technical perfection. This commercial success encouraged the industry to invest in artists throughout their careers, not just during their physical prime. Music therapy programs incorporated Billie's story into their training, using her example to help patients understand that musical expression could continue even after traditional performance abilities were compromised. Stroke patients regaining speech, Parkinson's patients working with movement, depression patients seeking emotional outlet, all found inspiration in her resilience. Billie Holiday showed us that music isn't about having a perfect voice, explained music therapist Dr. Michael Rodriguez. It's about having something to say and finding a way to say it. Her damaged voice became more expressive, not less, because she learned to work with her limitations instead of fighting against them. The philosophical implications of Billie's comeback resonated beyond medicine and music. Her story became a metaphor for resilience, adaptation, and the possibility of finding strength in apparent weakness. Rehabilitation counselors used her example with patients facing life-altering disabilities. Addiction recovery programs referenced her comeback as proof that past damage didn't have to define future potential. Cancer support groups found hope in her demonstration that something broken could become more beautiful than it had been when whole. Billie Holiday taught us that healing doesn't always mean going back to the way things were, said Dr. Patricia Evans, who directed a comprehensive rehabilitation program. Sometimes healing means accepting what is and finding new ways to be fully yourself. The spiritual dimensions of her comeback also influenced religious and philosophical communities. The idea that brokenness could lead to greater beauty, that limitation could become liberation, resonated with traditions that emphasize finding meaning in suffering. She demonstrated something profound about the human condition, reflected theologian Dr. James Patterson, that our wounds can become our greatest gifts, that our limitations can force us to discover capabilities we never knew we possessed. This understanding influenced how society approached aging, disability, and loss. Instead of viewing these experiences as purely negative, Billie's example suggested that they could be transformative, opening new possibilities rather than just closing old ones. Educational institutions began incorporating her story into curricula about resilience and adaptation. Students learned that setbacks could become setups for greater achievements, that the end of one path could be the beginning of a better one. But perhaps most importantly, Billie Holiday's comeback from vocal damage became a testament to the power of authentic expression. In a world that often valued surface perfection over emotional truth, she proved that scars could be more beautiful than smooth skin, that weathered voices could carry more meaning than pristine ones. Her final performances, recorded on equipment that captured every rasp and roughness in her damaged voice, remain among the most moving pieces of music ever created. They serve as permanent reminders that beauty doesn't require perfection, that art doesn't require youth, and that the most powerful performances often come from those who have learned to transform their pain into purpose. The lesson from that night at Jimmy's Lounge in 1956, when Billie Holiday returned to the stage after 6 months of medical silence, continues to inspire anyone who has been told they can't do what they love. Her comeback proved that sometimes the experts are wrong, that healing takes many forms, and that the most beautiful music often comes from voices that have learned to sing through their scars and find strength in their imperfections.